Dan Canfield. I'm a limnologist, which means I study lakes and rivers. Today we'll discuss an environmental issue that concerns many Floridians. That issue is lake eutrophication, or the nutrient enrichment of lakes. By now, everybody knows Florida's rapid growth is placing greater demands on our lakes. This growth has caused many lakes to change, in some cases to conditions that are undesirable. To prevent further lake degradation and restore the usability of damaged lakes, we must establish management plans for each lake. People have lots of ideas about what makes a quality lake. Some folks want cultivated aquatic gardens. Others wish to see a natural setting. And then, of course, there are different views of what is natural. Some folks look for the wildlife, and others are more interested in fishing, whereas others are mainly interested in swimming or other recreational activities. It's not easy for everyone to agree on what a lake's management objective should be, or what is practical. Lake eutrophication has been defined as the nutrient enrichment of a lake. This enrichment has been linked to increases in algae and aquatic weeds, which are believed to cause a deterioration in water quality and fish populations. Therefore, many people believe eutrophication is bad, and that it leads to the destruction of lakes. Let's see if this is true. How does nutrient enrichment affect algae, aquatic weeds, water quality, and fish? First, let's look at nutrients. Nutrients are nothing more than elements, such as phosphorus and nitrogen, that make plants grow. They are not pollutants in the sense that gasoline, mercury, and other toxic chemicals are pollutants. But too many nutrients can be considered pollution because they may cause a chain of events that may make a lake undesirable. Eutrophication is governed by natural and human factors. But before we look at these factors, we need to understand what trophic states are. Lake trophic status is a measure of the biological productivity of a water body. Biological productivity is simply how many plants and animals live in a lake. It is not static. In fact, all lakes change their productivity over time. Basically, limnologists recognize 4 trophic categories. At one end of a very broad continuum are oligotrophic lakes. Oligotrophic lakes are biologically unproductive lakes. They are typically nutrient poor and support very few plants and fish. Because algal levels in oligotrophic lakes are low, these lakes often have very clear water. You can see very deep into them. At the other extreme are the hypereutrophic lakes. These lakes are characterized by very high concentrations of nutrients and water that is typically clouded with algae. Although the waters may be aesthetically unappealing, hypereutrophic lakes are not dead lakes. They can't be called dead because these lakes support large amounts of aquatic plants, fish, and other animals. They are the world's most productive lakes. In between oligotrophic lakes and hypereutrophic lakes on the trophic continuum, there are 2 other categories: mesotrophic lakes and eutrophic lakes. Mesotrophic lakes are moderately productive with slightly green water. Eutrophic lakes are productive lakes with murkier water. It is important to know that the trophic states of lakes can change. A lake that is mesotrophic this year may, for many reasons, evolve into the eutrophic category a few years from now. Also, eutrophication can occur within each category, as when some nutrients are added, but not enough, to cause a lake to evolve to the next trophic state. Just because we have a eutrophic lake does not mean that people have somehow been responsible, and it does not mean that eutrophic lakes are necessarily bad. It's important to recognize that all 4 trophic states occur naturally in Florida. There are several primary factors that cause a lake to be either oligotrophic, mesotrophic, eutrophic, or hypereutrophic. A primary determinant of lake trophic status is the soils that a lake exists in. Regional geology or soil types set the potential trophic state of a lake. Geology is the primary reason why Florida has such a diverse group of lakes compared to other regions of North America. As mentioned earlier, a primary nutrient responsible for plant growth is phosphorus. Here in Florida, we have geologic formations that are rich in phosphorus. In some areas of the state, these phosphatic formations are sufficiently rich that we mine phosphorus for use in manufacturing fertilizer. In other areas, phosphorus in the soils is still sufficiently rich to create very productive eutrophic water bodies. Some regions of Florida have nutrient-poor oligotrophic lakes. Most of these lakes occur in the high sandhill regions. As you move farther down the state, however, there is a general pattern of increasing nutrient concentrations. In peninsular Florida, most of the lakes are naturally either mesotrophic or eutrophic. There are other natural eutrophication factors to consider as well. One of them is lake depth. Specifically, what is the average depth of a lake? If you have two lakes in the same exact soil type, the deeper lake will have a greater volume of water to dilute the nutrients coming in, and hence will have a lower nutrient concentration. The shallow lake will have a lesser volume of water to dilute incoming nutrients, and so will have a higher nutrient concentration. Hydrologic flushing rate is another major eutrophication factor. In other words, how fast does water move through the lake system? Limnologists recognize that if the lake is replacing its volume of water every 7 to 14 days, there is insufficient time for the nutrients to be used in that lake. The nutrients simply flow downstream to some other water body. On the other hand, in lakes that have slow flushing rates, the nutrients can be used for plant production. The effective flushing rate can be illustrated by Florida's springs. If you go to our springs, the water is very, very clear. Yet because of our geology, these springs are typically very rich in nutrients. If you take that spring water and hold it for 12 to 14 days, it turns very green with algae. So why aren't our springs green and murky instead of blue and clear? The answer is because they're fast flushing rate. The water is moving so fast that by the time the algae start to grow, the water has moved way downstream. Many of our lakes don't have streams coming into them or leaving them. They are called seepage lakes. Seepage lakes generally get their water from groundwater movement, runoff, and rainfall. They have very slow hydrologic flushing rates. There is another major factor that influences trophic state, and that is the sedimentation rate. Over time, all lakes lose some of their nutrients to the bottom, where they are bound up in the sediments. These lost nutrients then have no effect on the trophic state of a lake. However, if something stirs up the water, which in turn stirs up the sediments, nutrients are returned to the water column and are again available for algal growth. Wind is especially effective in shallow open lakes, where wave action stirs up and resuspends nutrient-rich bottom sediments. This is especially important in Florida, where most of our lakes are shallow. Now let's briefly look at the human factor. As soon as people move onto a lake or its watershed, we begin to accelerate the process of eutrophication. Humans may contribute nutrients through wastewater disposal, agricultural practices, and urban runoff. And while it's easy to focus on the folks that have their homes on the edge of the lake, research has shown that activity many miles away from the lake may actually have a greater consequence to the lake than development on the shoreline. We are all part of the problem. So far, we have discussed eutrophication and trophic states and the natural and human factors which govern them. Now let's look at the effects of eutrophication. Right or wrong, many people judge the quality of a lake by its water clarity. Clear water lakes may be considered to be high quality, whereas murky water lakes may be considered to be low quality. What controls water clarity in Florida lakes? Besides suspended sediments, the two major factors are algae and water color. The more algae, the less clear the water. And the amount of algae present depends on how many nutrients are in the water. Also, the more color, the less clear the water. Color is determined by natural plant chemicals like tannins and lignins that run off from our swamps and forests, especially after heavy rains. To measure water clarity, we use a small black and white disc called the Secchi disc. This disc is simply dropped into the water, and where it disappears from view is called the Secchi disc depth. In lakes with low algal levels and no color or suspended sediments, you may see the disc down to 30 feet or more. However, if the amount of algae in the water doubles, the water clarity will decrease very rapidly, and the disc may disappear at 18 feet, 15 feet, or something like that. If the algae continues to increase, the water clarity continues to drop. However, it is important to know that beyond a certain amount of algae in the water, water clarity is basically constant. That is to say, once water contains a certain high level of algae, water clarity will not change with the addition of more nutrients. Conversely, if a lake's water has high levels of algae, and we were somehow able to reduce the algae by 2/3, no one would see any difference in water clarity. The water would remain just as green and murky as before.
Suppose you're the first person to build a house next to a nice clear lake. Suppose you can see down 24 feet. You're very happy with this lake.
You want to share your good fortune, so you call your friends. Your friends build their homes and cause eutrophication. So what happens to the lake? Suppose the added nutrients cause the algae to grow and the water clarity is reduced from 24 feet, maybe down to 12 feet. Now the friends that just moved in might find 12 feet very acceptable. They think their lake is crystal clear compared to the lake down the road. However, you knew the lake when you could see down 24 feet. You might complain that environmental damage has occurred, and in a sense you would be correct. You and your neighbors have had an effect on the lake.
Okay.
Now suppose that more people move onto the lake and add more nutrients. Eventually, depending on the lake, you may reduce the water clarity some more. Sooner or later, the Secchi disc reading could get down to less than 3 feet, and then everyone is going to be upset.
Lake eutrophication does not always only involve algae. Quite often we have to deal with plants that many call aquatic weeds.
These plants, properly called macrophytes, generally increase with increased eutrophication, just as algae do. While oligotrophic lakes will support few, if any, macrophytes, eutrophic lakes can be jammed full of them. Aquatic macrophytes can actually cover a lake, greatly hindering our uses and significantly affecting the ecosystem itself. When this happens, they are considered aquatic weeds and need to be controlled. Control methods are reviewed in another videotape in this series, Florida's Aquatic Plant Story.
A major question of aquatic plant management is how many aquatic plants should we leave in a lake?
How does the amount of macrophytes affect water clarity? To answer this question, we need to know the relationship between the amount of macrophytes and the amount of algae in lakes. We have found that in nutrient-rich eutrophic and hypereutrophic lakes, we often have a great abundance of macrophytes. We have also found that under certain conditions, these plant-filled lakes may have water that is relatively clear. What happens if we remove a large amount of these plants? The water often turns greener. The algae proliferate. The reasons algae proliferate when the macrophytes are removed are very complicated, and we can't go into them in detail here. But the reasons have to do with the amount of macrophytes that were in contact with the water and an increase in wave action, which promotes bottom stirring and nutrient resuspension. While we can't always predict how clear the water will be after we remove lots of higher plants, we can say something about a popular misconception. If we leave or plant a small fringe of macrophytes around the edge of a eutrophic lake, say 15% of the lake's total area, will we get or maintain clear water? The answer is usually no. A small fringe of plants may be aesthetically pleasing, be attractive to birds and other wildlife, and act as protective cover to fishes, but these few plants will have little effect on the overall water clarity. Research has shown that in most lakes, the plant cover must be greater than 50% to cause or maintain clearer water. This level of macrophytes, however, is often considered to be an aquatic weed problem by various user groups.
Another key criteria for judging the quality of a lake is its fisheries. How does eutrophication affect fishing?
Pond owners often fertilize sport fishing ponds to increase the food supply for fish production. When nutrients are added to a lake, algae grow, small animals eat the algae, small fish eat the small animals, and large fish eat the smaller fish. This is true in natural lakes as well as in artificial fish ponds. Sometimes the media portrays eutrophication as leading to a dead lake. However, scientific research has consistently shown that as lakes become more eutrophic, the number of fish increases dramatically. In fact, the best sport fish lakes in Florida and elsewhere are eutrophic lakes. In Florida, eutrophic lakes produce large amounts of bass, speckled perch, bluegills, and shellcracker.
Why do some people think eutrophication hurts fishes? Eutrophication can cause a change in species composition.
As lakes become more eutrophic, some types of fish grow more rapidly than others. In northern lakes, trout and salmon may be replaced by bass and perch. In Florida, catfish and gizzard shad may become dominant. For example, hypereutrophic Lake Apopka is sometimes said to be a dead lake because few bass are caught there. Actually, it has one of the highest overall fish populations anywhere in Florida. Most types of fish, with the exception of bass, are present in large numbers, but catfish and gizzard shad dominate. While some people may complain that they don't catch bass, there is a good speckled perch fishery, and the catfish support a commercial fishery valued at about $1 million a year. Setting fish management objectives is just another problem of lake management. In oligotrophic lakes, you can have good fishing, but the absolute number of fish are always much lower than in eutrophic lakes.
We've discussed eutrophication and its effects. Now we must discuss, can we manage it and should we manage it?
As we discussed earlier, phosphorus is generally the nutrient of primary interest in regards to lake eutrophication. And since more phosphorus usually causes more algae to grow, making water less clear, many lake managers have come to believe that by reducing or stopping phosphorus inputs, we can cause lakes to clear up. And indeed, in certain cases, phosphorus control efforts have been highly successful on northern lakes. Yet in other cases, nutrient control efforts have had no noticeable effects. Can we manage eutrophication in Florida lakes? The answer is sometimes yes, but oftentimes no. This is because in Florida there are many lakes where the phosphatic soils alone contribute all the phosphorus needed for dense algal growth. In these lakes, no matter what we do, even if all human nutrient inputs were stopped, we would not be able to reduce the nutrients below the algae's critical growth levels and then clear up the water. Likewise, we wouldn't reduce aquatic weed problems. These lakes are simply naturally eutrophic, and management strategies other than nutrient control are needed. However, there are lakes in Florida where natural conditions could allow nutrient control efforts to have an effect on algal growth and water clarity. Some of our naturally oligotrophic lakes are good candidates for stringent nutrient control, whereas for our naturally eutrophic lakes, nutrient control programs probably cannot make a difference in terms of water clarity. The important thing to remember here is that nutrient control can be effective on some lakes, but on other lakes, we literally would be wasting time and money.
What have we learned today? First, we learned that eutrophication is the nutrient enrichment of not only the lake, but the entire aquatic ecosystem.
We also learned that a lake's trophic state is simply a measure of the biological productivity, and that all trophic states occur naturally in Florida. We learned that eutrophication is governed by natural factors as well as by people. All people contribute to eutrophication, whether they live next to a lake or many miles away. Natural factors may directly contribute nutrients or prevent nutrients from leaving a lake. Natural factors include geology and soil types, lake depth, sedimentation rate, flushing rate, wind, rain, and so on. Depending on the amount of nutrients in the soil, lakes in some part of the state are naturally oligotrophic, with very clear water, while lakes in other parts of the state are naturally eutrophic, with green, cloudy water. We also learned that greener, more eutrophic water is not necessarily bad water. Eutrophic lakes are not dead lakes. In fact, eutrophic and hypereutrophic lakes are the most biologically productive, with the most fish and wildlife. At the other extreme, clear water, nutrient-poor oligotrophic lakes have relatively few fish and wildlife. We found that as lakes are more eutrophic, they generally have more macrophytes. And we found that removing large amounts of macrophytes releases nutrients to the algae, so the water becomes greener. We also learned that leaving or planting a fringe of macrophytes around a lake will do little to improve water clarity. As a rule of thumb, about half a lake's bottom area must be covered with plants to cause any noticeable improvements in water clarity.
By now you may be thinking that eutrophication is far too complicated and that there are too many variables to think about. Geology, water clarity, fish, aquatic plants, people. Yes, lakes are complicated, but science has given us sufficient information to begin the management process. What is needed now is for informed citizens to come together to establish management objectives for each lake. These objectives must reflect not only the community's desired uses, but the natural functioning of Florida lakes.